Welcome to America's Forbidden History, the channel where we uncover forgotten stories, hidden facts, and the mysteries of the past that shaped our world. If you love history, rare finds, and untold truths, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us on this journey through time. Imagine opening a soldier's survival meal during the Cold War and finding not just cheese and crackers, but a pack of cigarettes. K-rations were originally developed during World War II as compact, calorie-dense meals for troops in the field. By the early years of the Cold War, these rations had become a staple for both military stockpiles and survival planning at home. They were designed to be lightweight, portable, and packed with the bare essentials of nutrition: cheese spreads, canned meats, crackers, and sometimes even chocolate. But tucked alongside the food was something you'd never expect to see in an emergency ration today: a few cigarettes, neatly sealed in a tiny cardboard box. At the time, smoking wasn't just common, it was cultural. Cigarettes were considered a morale booster, a way to calm nerves in high-stress situations. For soldiers staring down the possibility of nuclear war, the government believed that morale could be just as important as calories. A meal wasn't just about feeding the body, it was about keeping the mind steady. To the military, a few puffs of tobacco might mean the difference between panic and composure in a crisis. Looking back, it's almost unthinkable. Today, we know the dangers of smoking, but in the 1950s and 60s, the government not only tolerated it, they supplied it, even in survival kits. For many veterans, the memory of tearing open that little box of cigarettes in the middle of a ration pack lingers as a strange mix of comfort and danger, a reminder that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about holding on to normalcy in the face of fear. But cigarettes weren't the only strange thing the government stockpiled. In fact, when it came to feeding millions of Americans in fallout shelters, the real staple wasn't meat, or even canned vegetables. It was crackers. Mountains and mountains of crackers. Picture yourself deep inside a fallout shelter. The lights are dim, the air is heavy, and the only thing between you and hunger is a giant metal tin of crackers. In the early 1960s, as Cold War tensions escalated, the U.S. government launched one of the most ambitious civil defense programs in history, stocking fallout shelters across the country with food and water. What they chose to store was not glamorous. It wasn't hot meals, canned stews, or even the comforting taste of soup. Instead, warehouses churned out millions of pounds of one product: civil defense crackers, packed into large olive-drab metal tins, each weighing about 17 pounds. These crackers were made mostly from wheat flour and vegetable oil. The goal wasn't taste, it was survival. They were cheap to produce, could last up to 20 years, and were dense enough to keep a family alive for weeks at a time. The logic was simple. Crackers required no cooking, no refrigeration, and minimal storage space. They could be eaten plain, crumbled into water for a mushy porridge, or spread with peanut butter if you were lucky enough to have some. For the government, they represented efficiency, one product that could feed millions. And for the American public, those tins symbolized preparedness. They were reassurance that, if the worst happened, at least no one would starve. But the reality of eating them was far less comforting. Survivors and testers alike described the crackers as dry, bland, and almost impossible to chew without water. They turned to dust in your mouth, and after days on end, they became not just food, but a burden. The very thing meant to keep morale alive often wore it down. In many shelters, people dreaded opening those olive-drab tins, knowing that survival came at the price of flavor, comfort, and even dignity. And yet, crackers weren't the strangest thing chosen for survival. Because alongside those tins, the government stockpiled something stickier, richer, and, believe it or not, thought to withstand even the fallout of a nuclear blast: peanut butter. In the event of nuclear war, the U.S. government believed one food could outlast chaos itself: peanut butter. During the Cold War, civil defense planners searched for foods that could be stored for decades, transported easily, and provide a concentrated source of energy. Peanut butter checked all those boxes. By the late 1950s, government contracts funneled millions of pounds of the sticky spread into emergency stockpiles. It wasn't just a household favorite, it was reimagined as a survival tool. Packed in sturdy cans and sealed tight, it was believed to resist contamination, spoilage, and even radiation to some degree if stored correctly underground. For Americans, peanut butter was more than just food, it was comfort. Children grew up with peanut butter sandwiches, parents saw it as a cheap source of protein, and it fit perfectly into the nation's post-war culture of convenience. In a survival scenario, peanut butter could deliver protein, fats, and calories in a single scoop. It didn't require refrigeration, cooking, or fancy preparation. A spoon was all you needed. For families huddled in fallout shelters, this simple jar carried the memory of normal life, something recognizable in a world that might never feel the same again. But as the years passed, stockpiled peanut butter revealed its darker side. Cans swelled from trapped gases, oils separated, and what emerged often looked and smelled far from edible. For children of the era, stories circulated of opening tins that had turned rancid, leaving behind a sour, chemical odor that made the stomach churn. What was once comfort food became a grim reminder that survival meant compromise. Peanut butter, the symbol of childhood, could become nearly inedible in the silence of a shelter. And if rancid peanut butter sounds unappetizing, it pales in comparison to what came next: biscuits so hard, so dry, that many wondered if they were meant for people at all. They weren't bread, they weren't crackers, and they certainly weren't cookies. These were survival biscuits, designed less for eating and more for enduring. In the early 1960s, fallout shelters needed a food that could sit in storage for decades and still be edible when disaster struck. Enter the civil defense survival biscuit. Developed by government contractors, these biscuits were made from wheat flour, sugar, and shortening, pressed into dense, rock-hard squares. Unlike ordinary crackers, they were built to last for years without refrigeration, resistant to mold, pests, and decay. Packed into airtight containers, they became a cornerstone of the shelter supply system. The biscuits solved a logistical problem. They were compact, cheap to produce, and highly stable. A single tin could feed a small family for days, providing enough calories to survive in the sealed underground rooms of America's fallout shelters. For planners, these biscuits represented efficiency and durability, everything a survival ration needed to be. They could be stored in schools, churches, and basements across the country, giving everyday Americans a sense of preparedness. But eating them was another matter. Survivors described the biscuits as almost impossible to chew without water. They crumbled into a dry paste, sticking to the mouth and throat, leaving an aftertaste that many compared to cardboard. Children often refused to eat them, and adults could only choke them down with sips of the metallic-tasting water stored alongside them. Some joked that the biscuits could survive the bomb because they were barely food to begin with. For many, the survival biscuit became less a meal and more a test of willpower. Still, survival wasn't always about solid food. Alongside those biscuits, the government stored something even more essential: gallons of drinking water, sealed not in plastic bottles like today, but in giant steel drums. Food could wait, but water couldn't. And in the Cold War, America's survival plan came in the form of massive steel drums filled with water that didn't always taste like water at all. By the early 1960s, fallout shelters weren't just stocked with crackers and biscuits, they were lined with towering stacks of metal drums. Each drum held 17.5 gallons of drinking water, sealed tightly to last for years underground. Unlike plastic containers we see today, these drums were made of heavy steel, painted gray or olive green, stamped with the words U.S. Civil Defense. They were placed in schools, churches, and public shelters across the nation, ready for the unthinkable moment when citizens would be forced to hide below ground. Water was the most crucial survival element. A person could go weeks without food, but only days without water. These drums were designed to provide about 1 quart per person per day, just enough to keep a shelter full of people alive. And in a clever touch, once empty, the drums could be reused as makeshift toilets, complete with paper seat covers provided in the shelter kits. It was survival planning stripped down to pure practicality. But practicality didn't mean comfort. Over time, the water absorbed the metallic taste of the steel, leaving it bitter and sometimes almost undrinkable. Children gagged at its flavor, and many adults described it as tasting more like rust than refreshment. Worse yet, some drums leaked or grew contaminated, turning what was meant to be life-saving into a gamble. Imagine the despair of opening a drum after days in a shelter, only to find foul-smelling liquid instead of clean water. Survival, once again, came with a heavy price. And yet, not all survival food was so bleak. Hidden among the dry biscuits and rusty water were rations meant to boost morale, like a cake that, astonishingly, was designed never to age. Thanks for watching America's Forbidden History, uncovering the stories they tried to erase. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a hidden chapter of history. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep history alive.